Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Write or Die Show. I'm your host, Randi-lee. On the show, we interview other writers and we talk about mental health from their personal journeys. If you have not already hit that like and subscribe button, go ahead, do that now so that you never miss an episode.
Hi, I know we're a little bit late. I'm so sorry. Life. It happens. Anyways, we're gonna jump right into it. Today with us we have Autumn Karen. Hello, how are you?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Randy.
So where are you coming to us from?
I am actually currently in the podcasting studio at High Point University in North Carolina.
Oh, very nice. How's the weather out that way?
It is gorgeous after being freezing cold.
Okay, that's good. I'm still freezing cold, so yeah. So let's not talk about the cold anymore because that's gross. Tell us a little bit about who Autumn is.
So I am a writing professor and a longtime educator and also an accomplished ghostwriter. I mean, accomplished. I've written a bunch of books. I don't know how accomplished that is me.
As long as you feel accomplished, that is enough.
I feel accomplished. I feel like I've paid the bills writing books, so that matters.
There you
And
go.
also a filmmaker. So I make movies with my production company. So there you go.
Very nice. When I was little, my dream goal was to become a famous movie star. And then I had a baby, and then life, and now I have my own show. So it kind of works out, right? It's the same. It's the same thing. I'm not making millions, but it's the same thing. Yeah.
It is the same thing. Having babies changes everything, Randy. Yeah.
It really does. And on that topic, that's what we're going to talk about today, kind of.
Yes.
So share a little bit of your story. You start wherever makes the most sense.
Start wherever it makes the most sense. So I became a writer. Like we're on the Write or Die podcast, right? I became a writer after I got my master's degree in special ed, was teaching in the public schools and was teaching special education. And I had 4 kids at the time and needed to make some more money to feed them because, public school teachers don't make a lot of money. Shocker. They do not make a living
In
wage.
Canada, they make lots and lots.
Oh, well, down here in America, they do not. So I started writing online, starting with lesson plans and then blogs, ebooks, and then for a vanity press. That's how I became a writer. It was literally a write or die. Like you have to write to feed the kids. Like the rent payment is due, the mortgage is due, kind of thing. So that's my broad journey as a writer. I did not have any experience like with a writing mentor or anything until I went back to grad school 2.5 years ago and got my master's in screenwriting. My kids were finally old enough that I could make that happen. But I was already a writing professor, like without having a degree in writing or really any substantive college education in writing, which just goes to show that, you don't have to have a degree in writing to be a successful writer.
Education is great. It doesn't always come from school.
It doesn't, Randy. So like that's the broad view of my story. I became a single mom, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. It's been a while, and I'm raising 3 kids now. So I lost a daughter to epilepsy in 2015, and have a screenplay currently in production that's inspired by her loss. Yeah. So.
Oh wow. So if you're okay with it, let's talk a little bit more about that on the mental side of things, obviously. So how old was she?
Hermione was 3.5. She was headed towards 4 when she passed away.
Oh my goodness. Was that her first seizure or like?
No. So she was born complex, which is funny. I had a master's degree in special education. I guess I had not graduated. I was at my internship when she was born. So I gave birth to a special needs child right as I was finishing my master's in special ed.
Oh, that's a little bit funny.
It is a little bit funny. So I really I would say I had a lot of tools to advocate for her that people don't usually have. And that was, I am privileged in a lot of areas in my life, but that was a really huge point of privilege for me. So when she was born with severe disabilities. She had her first seizure when she was about 6 weeks old, and they were controlled. Actually, when she died, her epilepsy was pretty controlled. She'd been seizure free. She had not had a major seizure in 3 months when she died. So it was out of nowhere. And the day that she passed, I had been working, I was in my PhD in clinical psychology, which I didn't finish after she passed, and was studying, and heard her make a weird noise, and went to found her seizing, and it was a different kind of seizure. Like you could tell, and even when the EMS came, like this is one of the stories I just jump into, Randy. Sorry to be like,
no, do it.
So when the EMS came, we lived in the middle of nowhere on the side of a mountain up near Asheville, and the local EMS had a plan for her. So the plan was always that they would bring an ambulance to her house, and then they would take her by helicopter from a field right down the street to Asheville.
Oh, okay.
And when they came, the head of EMS was actually a friend of mine, and he got on the radio and said, we're going to take her to the local hospital instead of to Asheville. And I mean, it was a different kind of seizure. I knew it when I found her. She was bleeding. It was a different kind of seizure than she'd ever had, and so we kind of knew
something.
Yeah, I knew something, and I speak about it so freely in part because the screenplay that we are in production on goes in detail through her loss, and so I'm talking about it all the time to producers and things right now. So
yeah, well, and I think it's important for other parents that are going through it, or maybe they just had a kid that has special needs and they're scared. So I think it's important. I mean, that's what the show is all about, right? Sharing personal journeys so other people know that they're not the only person who has ever gone through it.
I mean, that is the thing. We found a lot of community with the Emmanuel syndrome community. That's what she had. There's all these little, very rare disorders that now they test DNA. And so she was one of like 500 people on the planet that has it.
Oh, wow. So super rare.
Super rare. Super rare. If like we had lottery odds like that, I would be very wealthy. But yeah, so she was super rare. Hermione was nonverbal, didn't walk, didn't talk, and lots of surgeries, those kinds of things. But really fantastic. I actually just completed work at the Ronald McDonald House here in Winston-Salem, where I live just up the road in Winston-Salem. And my ghostwriting students ghostwrote for volunteers because I had stayed in the Ronald McDonald House with Hermione down at Duke for like so much time. So
yeah.
So I think that kind of model of not being alone is really important. That's a core model of the Ronald McDonald House, is to give families space and connection. Yeah, and that's what Infinity Care. That's the name of the short film. That's what Infinity Care is about.
Oh, nice! I like the title. So when you first found out that she had special needs and stuff, like you said, you had a little bit more knowledge than the average parents. You had a little bit more way of advocating. What is some pieces of wisdom you can give to other parents that maybe they need to know or should know?
So the biggest thing that I think that we had, besides like just like my background in special ed, was we had something, and y'all might have this in Canada, we had something called a palliative care doctor. And he was, I don't think that they do this anymore. So she died 10 years ago. This is my knowledge is admittedly like,
of course, but I think some things stand the test of time.
They do. So we had a palliative care doctor who was over all of her care. That was really essential for us in terms of advocating for her. Like they wanted to do procedures for her at the hospital in Asheville that just weren't in her best interest. Like they were expedient and easy, but they were not in her best interest. And the palliative care doctor kind of came in and helped us advocate and like even know what to advocate for. Like you don't even know, like, what do I need to advocate for? He helped us get her to Duke, and they did different surgeries on her. They extended her jaw. in Asheville, they wanted to do this thing when she was an infant where they sewed her lip to her, to her front. They sewed her tongue to her
Oh.
front lip. It's called a button,
Oh.
because like her tongue would fall back, her jaw was receded, and so they wanted to do that, and that felt nightmarish to us. It's a common procedure, but it felt like not right.
It sounds nightmarish. Like it just doesn't, it doesn't sound like the best option.
No, it did not feel like the best option. So we, through the palliative care doctor, we advocated for her to go to Duke to get transferred there, and they did a surgery that actually fixed her jaw, that like made it bigger.
Okay.
And that's like, it fixed the problem instead of just kind of, because she would stop breathing. Yeah.
Okay.
And so like that was one piece of it. So that having somebody to advocate for you is really important. I think being cognitive of, at least in the American healthcare system, how traumatic it is really important, and how much they don't know. So my doctoral thesis was on the diagnosis of children with disabilities and how do parents get informed. You have like a child, and how do they tell you? Because the way they told us was our geneticist caught us in the NICU in Asheville, and at 6:30 p.m. he pulled us into the elevator hallway and told us that our daughter had Emmanuel syndrome, and he was like, "You can Google it," and we did.
Oh, that's super awesome. Dr. Google's great.
Dr. Google, he was like, "You will find more about it online than I will know, because it's so rare." And it was like, who's sleeping tonight? Like we have an infant in the NICU. Like, when are you going to sleep again?
Oh my gosh.
And so didn't have any real backup, and there was no like, hey, here's a counselor you can talk to. Like I'm gonna drop this news on you, but tomorrow morning I've made you an appointment with the hospital's counselor. Like there was nothing of that. It was just like, go deal with it.
Oh wow. I love that. I love that for parents who are struggling already. That sounds like a great thing to do to them.
That's awesome, Randy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how the Canadian healthcare system would give that news, because I've yet to speak with somebody in the same position in the Canadian health system. But I can imagine it would be similar, just knowing how our healthcare system works. And the struggle to go to a different hospital would be extremely hard here. It's because the healthcare is free, you basically get what you get, and you don't really have a lot of choices.
Yeah, so everybody talks smack about the American healthcare system, because we were public school teachers, and we did not make enough. Like we made so little money, even working full time, that she got public health care because she was legally disabled when she was, I think, 3 days old. They deemed her by the state, you're legally disabled.
Okay.
And because of our income threshold as public school teachers, that put her on Medicaid. And her care was excellent. Like we had to advocate, but there were like places for us to go. I felt like her, in terms of having access to things, I am very good at pitching a fit. Like my own Karen, when it came to my kids, I could do the whole Karen thing. And
sometimes you have to.
So for her, there was a lot of like advocacy and a lot of like, let me speak to a manager about what y'all are doing to my child. Like, this is not okay.
Yeah.
So we actually had a great experience in terms of not having to pay for her care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but at least having options is really ideal. Much more ideal. Without getting too political. Okay, so, and how did you deal with the mental side of things, right? Like emotionally, you just gave birth, which, if you've never given birth, is extremely emotional and physical and daunting, and takes a bit before your body gets back to what it was if it ever does. But then you said she was 3 days when they deemed her that. So, I mean, you're still healing yourself. How are you dealing with this news?
Well, so for Hermione, her whole pregnancy was a little like we never knew that there was something wrong with her.
Okay.
But I had these fantastic midwives, and where we live in North Carolina, midwives are licensed through a doctor. So you have like a midwife, and then there's a doctor. But the midwife, like if I never had a C-section. If I'd had a cesarean section, the midwife would have done the cuts. So they're both like in the hospital, and they also do home births. And the midwifery practice that we used has been closed for several years now because the head midwife retired. But New Dawn midwifery was tremendous. So she was my third child. I'd had 2 babies with them already. And they like knew the whole time that something was off. They were like, you're not measuring. They're like, we don't know what it is, but your belly doesn't measure right. Like there is something, we can't figure it out. And so we had so many tests. We went to specialists and they could never find anything wrong. Like they kept looking. And she was measuring so small. And finally they were like, well, maybe like we just got your due date wrong. Maybe like your cycle wasn't, so we're going to add another 2 weeks onto your due date. Cause she's so small. It's not right. There has to be something, but they could never find anything. Okay. So when she was born, like we weren't expecting anything to be wrong, but I'd had 10 ultrasounds looking for stuff.
Oh,
that they could never find.
So, wow.
So like we knew that, you know, and then she was born and immediately it was exhausting, you know, all those things. But her birth was weird. Like her birth, she like, you know, birth stories, but like she broke her own water. She like scratched like the amniotic sac with her little fingers. Like I could feel them. And then she actually broke my water. And so like it was a whole weird thing. Her entire birth thing was weird. So it was kind of not expected, but also just so exhausting. And then they didn't find anything wrong with her for like several hours. Like it took a while for them to like figure it out. And then it's emotionally devastating and exhausting in a way that, you know, it's so odd, Randy. And I will tell people freely and all the time, not having a special needs child, being on like the other side after losing her, my life is easier. Like it is patently easier with neurotypical children. Even though like I have a child with ADD and a child with autism. Like,
it's still very different than what she had. Okay. And then as you're dealing with everything while she was growing, was there anything that you did for yourself? Like what did you find most helpful for yourself to keep at the level you needed to be to do all this advocacy? Because it's draining.
It is really draining. I leaned really heavily on family. So my mother and grandmother, you know, they would come up. They lived on the other side of the state, but they would drive up and spend time with us and spend time with her. That was really helpful. I did a lot of normalizing. Like we put her with other children who were neurotypical. That was really important. We traveled a lot. We went camping with her. Like,
did she love outdoors?
No, she did not. She was like, absolutely not. But we did. So normalizing a lot of that. The community was super important, especially the online community. So being one of only 500, it's still a tight community.
Yeah. Okay. So. Yeah, I think those are such good ways of doing it because, I mean, my kid has autism, so different, like you said, very different than that. But normalizing things, I think, kind of gets forgotten sometimes. With all of the advocacy, the therapies and the hospitals and all that, you forget that they're still kids sometimes and want to do fun stuff, even when they don't think it's fun. Because mine is also not an outdoorsy one. So I feel you on that where it's like, but I just want you to like outside and camping because I love camping. So I'm like, I just love it. And we try, and she cries and wants to go home. So yeah. So and you lost her in 2015, right? That was the right date. So how did you afterwards, and with your other kids, what kind of things were you able to, trying to figure out how to word this question. So I hate saying advice. I don't like advice. What did you do that you found really helpful with still being able to be there for your other kids and dealing with such a significant loss?
So in retrospect, I have to say, because, okay, so one thing, obviously, I am not married anymore, so like that is its own thing. Having a child with severe disabilities is so much harder than I ever imagined it would be. And I think there is something to be said about just like acknowledging that it is just harder. Like it just is. And not that we want to put value judgments on people's lives, but people who have children with severe disabilities deserve more support. Like they just need more community. I did not, one thing that was not, that I did not do well is we had a lot of community after she died. It would have been helpful to have had more, to lean in more deeply, not to like get over it. But I have discovered that time does not fix it like at all. Right. We do readings of Infinity Care, and I lose my shit. It's an animated film. So I am directing it and I'm working with the animation team. And it is still raw 10 years later. But talking about it is incredibly helpful. Making art about it is helpful. The most healing thing I have done for myself, and this is not for my kids, was to write Infinity Care, which I did with the help of a mentor. It's the first script that I ever wrote. And it won a bunch of awards, did really well, and all of that. Yeah, it was awesome. And now we're in production. So like I have people coming on board, and every time somebody reads it, every time I talk to a producer or an animator, or I'm about to start seeking a composer for it, every time I talk to somebody and it touches somebody, that is healing. So being more public about it, that has always been healing for me. At the time that Hermione died, I was writing for a blog. Okay. So and she was kind of the face of it. And this is a whole nother thing, but the blog and I parted ways after she passed because I no longer had a special needs child, and they were focused on special needs. And that was hard at that moment because she'd only been dead for a couple of months, and it was like, this was a big income source for us. And now it's gone. And so that was tough. So in that kind of vein, I also think that building community outside of just the special needs, like we were talking about, normalizing.
Yeah,
that's really helpful. I don't know that I did the best things by my older kids. I will say that. My other kids, I look back and I'm like, they deserved more than what I was able to give them in the wake of her passing. And my oldest is 19 now, and we've, talked out a lot of those things. And he's kind of come to terms, with his sister's death as much as possible. But I don't think that I was a great mom for a while in there. I just,
you know what? It takes a lot to be able to say something like that, because nobody ever wants to admit that. But you probably did the best that you could at the time with what you had available to you, right? And that's something else that we tend to forget, that therapy made me realize. So issues with my mom in the past, and I was always a mama's girl, so it made me realize she did the best she could at the time with what she knew. And I'm like, oh, that really put it into a different perspective for me. So even though she now, after we've talked about things and whatever, she's kind of went, oh, I wish I would have. I wish you would have too. But I've come to, the working it out or whatever, and just being like, okay, you did what you could at the time with what you had. And I think changing the way we think about certain past experiences with people if you realize that they did do their best, it can make a really big change moving forward with that person and that relationship.
No, I totally agree. I have a hard time. I have a hard time with my own mom, not in looking back and seeing her faults, but I feel like my mom was so fantastic to us, and I know that she put herself to the back too much. Like, what I do know about her is
Yes.
she did not give herself enough, and so I struggle with like my career and whatnot. My kids are older, you know. My youngest is 12, and I've got one going to college this year.
Wow.
So I'm like, you know, they're old enough to kind of do themselves, but with my film career especially, like I work all the time. I've been the primary financial support for them for, I mean, a very long time. And so I work a lot. And I do spend time with them, and you know, I do those things with my boys. But I like the choice of the film career, the choice to go back to school for my MFA. I'm not going to say it was a selfish choice, but it is not something my mom would have ever done. And she was really supportive of that. She lives nearby. She kept them, you know, when I was in school, she would come feed them dinner and do all those things. Now they're old enough that they like feed themselves too. But
I do love that.
And it's really nice when they can drive around and do all that.
Yeah.
So I do like look back and see that my mom never gave herself enough. But at the same time, then when I do give myself enough, I'm like, oh my God. Like, now I feel guilty.
It's a fine line, I think, we walk as parents, where you need to do things for yourself, but then you also want to give so much to your kids. And it's this fine line, because if you give everything you have to them, you have nothing left. And you have to have something left, right? You are still your own person. So it's definitely a fine line that we walk. I don't know if any parent has figured out the exact balance of it all. They'd be a millionaire if they could bottle that knowledge and sell it somehow, but I don't think anyone has figured that out yet.
No, I don't think that they have. And, you know, some things you can't fix. So the way that Hermione died, the way that her life was so kind of chaotic for the 3.5 years that she was here, because she would, you know, she had a major seizure at a Boy Scout meeting. And that it was like a big Boy Scout meeting. She started seizing. The ambulance had to come and like take her to the hospital and everything, and like interrupted the kids' Boy Scout thing. You can't fix that, right? Like there's nothing different I could have done for the disruption. And it does make them, like my oldest, he's strong. Like I'm like, you're gonna be okay. Like you've been through a lot, and he's made it to the other side. I'm like, you're fine. I'll tell him, like, you're cooked. Like, I'm here for you. I'm here to help you decorate the cake, but the cake has been baked.
Yeah.
So I do think hard in the going, and you can't look back with regret. It is a really tough thing. You know, we talk about PTSD and those kinds of things, and I had a significant amount of you know, the CPTSD from her, because there was so much, like, you just never knew when the bomb was going to drop and she was going to have a major seizure. She spent so much time in the hospital. She was intubated so many times. Your entire life revolves around waiting for a bomb to drop. And then you kind of relive it over and over again, which is a lot. Infinity Care, you know, there's epilepsy, and it's really a meditation. I call it meditation on grief and capitalism, because it does intersect with the money that it costs to care for a child, and then what even happens after they die. You know, there's so many pressures, and it's not our entire responsibility to hide those from the kids. Like, so
that's a really good point, I think, is kids don't need to know it all, obviously, but I think sometimes we don't give them as much credit to deal with things as we should. And then, at least in my situation, then it becomes more confusion and what you don't really care for me because you're not sharing these things with me. And it's a whole different ball game. And as a parent, this is part of what my mom and I talked about. She was like, "Well, I was just trying to shield you. I was just trying to help you. You know, you were going to school. You were getting good grades. You were fine." I'm like, I was not, right? So, again, there's that fine line of what do you tell them, what do you not tell them, and again, I don't think anybody knows the exact right amount to share, but each person knows their kid best, I hope, and yeah, sometimes you have to share a little bit more than you at first maybe thought, because shielding them too much also swings the bar too far the other way.
It does. And, you know, it's been really interesting as my oldest, for a wide variety of reasons, some of them to do with his sister, some to do with the split. He was a year behind in school. So he is graduating at the age of 19, which is old here in America. And you know, that was always a concern, but it was definitely the best choice academically for him. Just like hands down, he needed that. Because when we moved here, they had never been in school. We had kind of homeschooled loosely before, but not really. So they were academically pretty far behind. And so when he came in, it was a rough transition in middle school, but then he's grown so much and done all that. And he's really proud. He's scholarshiped into several universities. He's
nice.
Yeah, I know. He's going very far away from me, probably to the cold north, to New York for college, which is great.
Oh, wow.
But, yeah, but he's scholarship, so he will go debt-free to college, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And super proud of him. But as he's gotten older and he just turned 19, you know, it's like there's a grown person in my house. Like there's like a grown man in my house. And we've had a lot of conversations. And I'm still like, he doesn't need to know everything about his parents' lives. But like kind of starting to talk to him about, well, this is what was going on behind the scenes when you were experiencing this. I do think it's kind of lifted the veil on some of the traumatic experiences that he had when he was younger. He's actually voicing in the rough audio, not in the final. He's doing some voice work for me for Infinity Care as like a brother figure, that's really lovely. He's a good kid. And my other two, they're great kids too. They're too young for me to talk too much about on podcasts though. So that's good.
But as long as we know they're doing good.
No, they're really doing great. They're both smart and I think well recovered. My little guy, he was like 18 months old when she died. I mean, he was really young. So, and he was like they used to sleep together in a little crib. And so he was with her. He's got like, I don't know what kind of internalized trauma he may have because he was there with her when she had that last seizure. But he just bops along. He doesn't seem like affected. He's so different. So yeah, I do think that as kids get older and you start to have those like adults, not to adult conversations, because like you're 19, kid, but you're like, you are an adult in some senses, like legally.
Right? I know, it's weird because they're an adult, but they'll always be your baby.
Yeah, it's
how it is.
It's definitely weird. But also good. It feels natural. I think as he's gotten older, I really hope my other two are that way. It's felt very natural, like the amount of freedom that he's had, and he stays home by himself, and you know, the girlfriend, and he's gonna road trip this summer, and then he's going to college. So that's been really helpful. But it is a thing, and this is a theme in Infinity Care, that like my daughter Hermione would have never done that. These milestones that I'm experiencing with him of independence, I would never have experienced with her. And she would be, she'd be 13 now, which is just, it's wild to think about. Because there's like a hole, you know, it's like two kids and they were all spaced evenly apart. And then there's this kind of 5-year hole where she would have been because they were right in there. But I interacting with other families who have kids with Emmanuel syndrome who are adults or with severe disabilities who are adults, because a lot of folks don't make it that long. And so it's just a whole nother thing, Randy. There's a little girl, gosh, she's, you know, like in her 20s, in London, near London, who is voicing the girl with manual syndrome in the film. And I will admit, and her mom knows this, she sent me the audio cut last week, and I still have not had the guns to listen to it.
Oh, wow.
It's a lot to like go and imagine what it would have been like had she lived, you know, like who would she have been, even with a manual syndrome. And part of the thing of Infinity Care, and this is complex, it's been complex for my animators, is there's a version of the little girl who has manual syndrome, and then there's a version of her that is neurotypical. And it's kind of the mom's exploration of that through this sci-fi zombie horror thing. I mean, like there's a Infinity Care is like it's sci-fi zombie horror stuff. But I
was not expecting that.
Yes, I know. It's a film with a twist. And we're doing the animated short right now. I wanted to make it animated to make it more accessible, and also because it's a compassionate representation of disability. Like, I was not, as a filmmaker, ready to dive into casting a child with a manual syndrome for a live action version, because I'm not gonna do it otherwise. Like, I'm not gonna cast that differently. So animation it's kind of like Love, Death and Robots. It's like Blur Studios style, very dark animation. But there is this kind of fantasy moment experience in it where the main character experiences her daughter as though she were neurotypical. And it's made some of the team on it, they'll come to me and they're like, is this okay? Like, this really makes me uncomfortable. Like, it's supposed to. That's the point. It should make you feel weird, because special needs parents, oftentimes, like, you cannot help but think, like, what would my child be?
100%. Like you said, mine has autism, and 100% I've had those thoughts going, wow, how much easier would her life have been had she not had to deal with this?
Yeah. And it's creepy, and it makes you feel weird, and it's like it's a strange feeling, because you love your child the way they are, but you can't help but think about it. So there is the climactic moment in Infinity Care is that experience. And it's disquieting for people who have not experienced it. And the people who, like you, have experienced it, you're like, oh my God, yes, of course we did that. Like, that's
yeah. Right, exactly. Although there is this whole grouping of people, at least in the autism community, that go, I would never want my kid to not have it. It makes them who they are. And I'm like, you guys are lying. Because I'm sorry, as a parent, if you can make your child's life better, easier, whatever it is, I feel like, wouldn't you do that, right? Whether it is autism or a different disability, wouldn't you want to take away their struggle as a parent? Like, that's all you want to do is take away their struggles and help them and everything. So I just feel like you guys are lying.
But that's totally a sentiment, right? And it's these like different points of view. I don't know. I think unless you're in it and you're in the fire of it, people just don't appreciate the complexity of, like, I can love my child and also wish that things were different. Like, those things can happen at the same time, and it doesn't mean that one is not true.
Yep. It's the same thing with like I said, any type of disability. My brother had died by drug overdose a couple of years ago.
I'm so sorry.
My mom 100% would have loved to have taken his addiction away from him. 100%. Not just so that he wouldn't have died, but to make his life easier, to make the struggle that he went through not there, right? So any kind of disability, mental health, physical, neurodevelopmental, I feel like as a parent, all you want is for them to live happy, healthy lives.
I am so sorry, Randy. I know that's hard.
Yeah.
To lose a sibling.
Yeah, I've lost 2 now. It's definitely not easy. But it's not about me today, so.
Well, my heart does go out to you, and I experiencing with my own kids, even though they were younger, losing a sibling it's got to be a different kind of hole. My mom lost her sister That's it. That's the Karen. So like I decided to go by Autumn Karen years ago publicly because my mom's sister's name was Karen, and it was always like this loved name in the family. And so every time I heard it, I was like, you know, there were pictures of her all over the house. I used to, when I, at a wild point in my teenage years, I thought I was the reincarnation of her. I was like, I'm just her come back to life. Like what a 90s teenager thing.
Right. Yep.
But then like 6 months after I bought my domain and started really publicly going by Autumn Karen, all the Karen memes hit. And I was like, this has a different meaning to people than it does to me.
Yes, it does.
But I watched my mom, you know, like mourn the loss of her sister who died 3 years before I was born for like my entire childhood, because that would have been, it would have been fairly raw. And whenever we talk about like my experience, I cannot help but think of my mom, who she was like 9.5 months pregnant. She was past due with my older brother when her sister passed away very suddenly. And my mom always felt like it was her fault because she had been living there. And my mom was like, our baby's coming. You've got to find another place to live. And then she left and passed away. Like and so she always felt this. And the way that my mom told the story of her being big pregnant and going to Karen's house and like laying on the floor and begging her not to die. And then she couldn't go to the funeral because she couldn't travel. So whenever I think of like my own trauma, I'm always like, but my mom, like mom had some real stuff. And I know I've had real stuff in my life, but she always talked about it, which I do think helped to normalize it. She never stopped talking about her sister. Right? She named me after. The pictures were always there. There were like objects in the house. I have a necklace of hers. Like there were objects that were always around. And so I never experienced death. It was sad, but it never felt unhealthy to me growing up. And my mom lost a close loved one every time she was pregnant. She lost her grandmother, she lost her father. Every time she had a baby, she lost somebody. And so I never thought of death as like this taboo thing to talk about because we grew up talking about these people. So in the spirit of all that we're discussing, talking about your siblings helps you. I know that talking about it helps me. So Infinity Care is so helpful, as hard as it is, and it's a little bit emotionally brutal, the production process. I'm a little like, okay, my therapist can be working overtime, but
I'm sure they won't mind.
Yeah, they won't mind. But it does help, you know, it brings it out into the light. Child loss is not something we talk about. I feel like it's either like glamorized in the media or it's just not realistically talked about. So like going through this experience, and even children with severe disabilities, like the films kind of tiptoe around them now. And
so well, yours won't, so there you go.
Mine will not.
So I know you've talked about it a bunch already, but is there plans on when it's coming out?
So we are currently in production, and we're going to launch crowdfunding. We've got other funders who are coming into place, but we are going to launch a crowdfunding campaign on March 26th, which is the anniversary of her death. It's 10 years since she passed.
Oh, wow.
And so we'll launch crowdfunding that day. We'll have some of the animation will be complete and some of the voiceover. So that's the first push. And then animation, like movies, take a long time to make. So we are looking at 2026, hopefully summer of 2026 to hit the festival circuit. That's the plan, but it's Infinity Care it's probably the most impactful film I'll ever make. You know, I mean, it's hard. It will be hard to top this, and not that I would want to. So so you can find more about on my website. And then Medusa's Gaze Films is my production company, and we support women and gender diverse folks behind the camera. That's like our mission. So Infinity Care will have 75% women and gender diverse folks behind the camera, which is unusual for Hollywood. So
excellent, awesome. And so I know you said find out more on your website. What is that?
autumnkaren.com.
So easy. Of course, it'll be in the description, but so easy. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing. And I wish you the best of luck. I mean, I don't think you need the luck, but it sounds like you guys are doing awesome. So March 26th.
Yes, we launched crowdfunding on Seed and Spark.
All right.
That'll all be
So
on the website.
everybody, go check out the website on March 26th. You can check it out before then too, but then go back.
Absolutely. And it'll be all over socials. I'm at Autumn Carrying everywhere, so you can find me online. And thank you so much, Randy.
Thank you.
As always, thank you so much for the amazing guests that we have on the show. Be sure to check out their links down in the description below. If you want to support the channel, go ahead and check out our merch store. We've got some very cool things on there. That's my favorite. Sorry, I'm busy ending the stigma. But there's some other very cool designs. 10% of the proceeds always goes back to the Canadian Mental Health Association. Be sure to follow us on Facebook at RB Media because we have some great new shows coming up and you never want to miss any of those episodes. And remember, the only way to end the stigma of mental health is to speak openly and honestly. Bye.